Do you have trouble with jumping on the serve? Do you have knee pain or a previous surgery, or you just have trouble coordinating that jumping action? Well, this video is for you. We're going to talk about how to get max power on the serve without jumping. Hi, it's Chris Lewitt, top American coach and coach to many #1 juniors in the United States. Let's dive into this video about how to hit the serve with max power without jumping. So in this video, I'm not going to be on court as much, but I'm going to share with you my ideas on what to do to get max power on the serve without jumping, and I'll share with you some suggestions. I do have a clip that I want to share later where I'm on the court talking about stances and how to serve without actually jumping. And the first thing we'll do is just get into each subject one by one on how to serve with max power without the jump. So the first thing I would do is try to maximize your upper body power and upper body strength. So that's pretty obvious. You want to have a really strong shoulder, and you want to have an explosive shoulder and upper arm, and you'd like to be able to maximize the kinetic chain above your legs. You're going to maybe use your legs a little bit you're going to get a little bit of push because the way I would recommend serving is with a step in, not with a jump. So you actually step in with your right foot if you're a right-hander, and I think that's really the key to unlock the serve power without actually jumping. So it's not going to be only one foot's going to be off the ground, and you're going to step in. Sometimes it's called a scissor movement, and you're going to scissor your feet, but you're not going to do a jump scissor. You're just going to scissor your feet. And I explain that in the video to follow. I have a clip for you guys coming up. And you want to maximize the power in your shoulder. So you're going to have a very small ground reaction force from your left leg. If you're a right-hander, you can reverse these if you're a left-hander. And you're going to try to maximize your external rotation of the shoulder and your acceleration up to the ball. Get a strong long axis pronation. And internal rotation of the shoulder, so good pronation and internal rotation of the shoulder through the impact. You need to have as much acceleration as you can in that shoulder range of motion, and you're not going to get quite as much deep down loading. You're not going to get the hip as back and down as some of the pros do when they load and explode, but that's fine. You can still generate a tremendous amount of pace with mostly with your upper body and just some trunk rotation. So you want good trunk, as much trunk rotation as you can get because you're not going to be able to turn quite as much. Your hips are going to be a little bit blocked because you're not able to jump out of that position. You're going to have to keep your left foot facing a little more forward, like to the net post or towards the net, which is unusual. Most of the top pros these days, they have their left foot almost parallel to the baseline, and you're not going to be able to jump out of that closed hip position. So your hips are going to have to be a little more open. Your foot position in the stance is going to have to be a little more open, but you're going to try to maximize your trunk rotation and your upper body power. The trunk rotation probably won't reach as much trunk rotation as you typically see with the pros, but you should be able to do almost everything else identical to the pros in terms of the checkpoints in the upper body, which is the power position, the point of max external rotation of the shoulder, which is the deep racket drop behind your back, the acceleration phase up to the ball, where your racket whips up on edge, and then the long axis pronation through the ball. You should be able to duplicate pretty much all of those things. You may not get quite as deep max external rotation because the legs aren't going to be pushing up, which causes the racket and upper arm to drive down, but you should get pretty close, and you should be able to serve very fast with just the trunk rotation and the upper body movement. Some people say that the legs are up to 50% of the power in the serve, but I just don't think that's accurate. For example, we know that wheelchair players can serve over 100 miles per hour without using the legs at all. So in this case, if you have a previous injury, like I have previously partially torn ACL in my left knee, so my knee is a little unstable, or if you've had any surgeries in the lower body, or if you have any hip, knee, ankle problems, you probably don't feel comfortable jumping and landing. The force of the landing especially, it's not so much the jumping typically, it's typically the landing that can irritate or make your knee or your hip, and you have lower back. Some people have lower back issues, so LBP. So there's all sorts of injuries that we get as we get older, or maybe because of some previous trauma, or you had a medical condition where you're just not able to jump, and that's fine. I just think that the idea that you need the legs to produce more than 50% of the serve powers is just, I don't think that's accurate, because we know that just standing there without using any legs at all, you can serve very fast. And I think the shoulder action and the trunk, the various trunk rotations, the shoulder over shoulder, and the shoulder rotational forces are the main drivers of power in the serve, especially internal shoulder rotation. So internal shoulder rotation to me is like the prime movement that maximizes your power. So that's where I would recommend focusing on, and don't worry about the legs. You can serve very fast without the legs. So another thing that I would focus a lot on is mobility, and especially if you're a senior or a veteran player, as we age, we lose mobility. Our body gets more tight in so many ways. So you want to maximize the mobility of your joints, and you want to maximize the flexibility in your muscles. So a good stretching program, yoga, there's a lot of good programs out there for mobility and strength. For example, Mark Kovacs has a wonderful program called the Bulletproof Arm, or the Bulletproof Shoulder, and I highly recommend those types of programs out there. There's a lot of good stretching programs online now. The internet and social media is amazing, the technology that we have. Like, for example, there's an app called Pliability, which is amazing. You can get customized stretching programs for yourself, and it's all there on your phone, and you can follow a stretching program anywhere. There's really incredible programs and technologies out there now. So I just think a good general stretching and mobility program is really important. Obviously, particularly for the upper body, you want to have good range of motion in your scapular area. So you want good shoulder range of motion. You need to be able to reach way back and down as best you can. And that can be a real challenge if you had a shoulder surgery or a previous shoulder injury, but you can work on it. And if you have a bad shoulder and bad knees and a bad lower back, it's going to be really hard to serve fast. You need to serve max power, you're going to need to have a flexible, mobile shoulder. You're going to need to hit as many of the checkpoints as you can with the upper body and the arm action going up to the ball. And so you just need to have a good flexibility and mobility program. That will be key to maximizing your power when you're not using the legs. One of the easiest ways to get more power and strength is to have a good strength training program. So 2 or 3 times a week would make sense to be in the gym working on general strength and maybe even some power, some plyometrics for the upper body. We know from the research that plyometrics are useful even as we age. So if you're a senior player or a veteran player, it can still be very beneficial to use plyometrics. There's a lot of good shoulder plyometrics you can do with medicine balls and small weighted balls. Again, I would reference Mark Kovacs' work in this area. He has some tremendous resources at Kovacs Institute, and I'm a tennis serve specialist and a CTPS with the International Tennis Performance Association, which are all organizations that Mark runs. And so I'm a big believer in the work that Mark's been doing, and a lot of the programs that he's put out I think are tremendously high quality. So I recommend those types of strength training programs. And in addition, you can serve a lot. I think serving, you're not going to be using your legs, but you can serve a lot. So you can do 100 to 200 serves a day, but you don't want to do it all at once. You want to break up the serves into safe amounts, like 20 serves at a time, 30 serves at a time, and let your shoulder rest. But you can try to build up a strong volume, a high volume of serving per week. So that means a daily serving practice, and that will help to strengthen the neuromuscular system. So you'll gain better neuromuscular control and better firing through the nervous system to the muscles, and you'll also be able to develop your power and kinetic chain in the upper body, and that way you can maximize the serve power without the legs. So in terms of the foot action, you want to do the scissor. So that's where you start in a more neutral stance, not super closed like the pros do on the baseline. So your starting position, your stance is a little more open than than you typically see with the pros, but that's going to allow you to step in with your right foot. And this is the serve that I learned from my dad when I was a kid. This is the serve that pretty much all the pros used back in the day before the rule change. I believe the rule change was 1961. You can fact check me on that. It was in the 60s where pros, before that time, they were not allowed to jump. And so when that rule changed on the high level of tennis, it transformed the biomechanics of the serve because players started to load more, load back and down more, and explode more from the legs. And players started jumping up to a foot into the air to make higher contact points. And it really accelerated the weaponization of the serve. When that rule changes like that make a big impact on technical development in any sport. And so this was a major rule change where you were actually allowed to jump. And so that since 1961 or early 60s, the serve has started to transform itself. I remember watching Boris Becker, who was a great server from the 80s, and when he was younger, he used to step in with a scissor kick. He used to do a jump scissor also, and I believe by the end of his career, he was doing a more traditional jump on the left leg, if I recall. But I remember he even in mid-career as a pro, he was the #1 player in the world. His leg drive and leg movement started to change, where he was grounded, then he was scissoring with the right, and near the end of his career, he was jumping like all the pros do now onto the left. And nowadays, I don't think there's a single pro who doesn't jump in and land on their left leg. And I remember the same happened, I think Carol Kuchera, if you guys remember the top 10 player, Carol Kuchera, great player, also from the 80s, maybe even played into the early 90s, but he's probably the last player I can remember. I remember watching him when I was growing up, and he used to jump with a scissor. He did a jump scissor on the right leg, so he used to jump in and land on the right leg. They called him the big cat, and Miloslav Machir was the little cat, or maybe Machir was the little cat, and Carol Kuchera maybe Machir was the big cat and Carol Kuchera was the little cat. Anyway, but this is like 80s maybe, and then by the early 90s, I mean, everybody jumped into the serve. Everybody just somehow the entire tour decided that jumping onto the left leg was a better way to do it. And there must be a reason why pros do that, because they can get more load back and down, they can stay sideways longer, they can generate better shoulder over shoulder, and then land with balance on the left leg. That must be what's happening, because otherwise we would see more of a mix, like how we see platform and we see pinpoint stances. We would see a mix of players jumping in on the right now and some jumping in on the left, but we don't. We see basically 100% of the players jump in on the left because they're able, it must be because they're able to stay sideways longer, they're able to get that shoulder over shoulder, that maximum shoulder over shoulder position for max power, and then it just makes sense with all that acceleration to land on the front leg rather than bringing the back foot and leg through. Probably because when you do bring the back foot and leg through, it opens up your hips sooner, so which you don't want. We know that the fastest servers in the world, the most elite servers in the world, they stay sideways as long as possible with their hip and trunk. And so it must be biomechanically driven, this change from jumping in on the left foot, stepping in on the right foot, jumping in on the right foot, versus jumping in on the left foot and the left leg. So there's been there's a huge technical change if you consider it, the span of history and the scope of this change from the 1960s until present, where before the 1960s and even through the 60s and 70s, a lot of players stayed on the ground, a lot of players did a right leg scissor, and that's completely disappeared from the pro tennis world. So guys, I'll share with you that on-court clip where I'm talking about the stances and stepping in and doing that scissor kick with the right foot, and I demonstrated a few times. You can see what that looks like, and I'll catch you on the other end. The most important thing is how you stand is to be very sideways, so you can turn your hip back and down and get a good loading of the back hip and the back leg. So it's important to try to stand sideways. The biggest problems that I see in terms of the stance are players who start too open, and this is very common with beginning players. And you see a lot of old school players or still coaches who teach old school technique to point the toe forward. And this just comes from the old days before players were allowed to jump until the 1960s players were not allowed to jump on the serve, so you had to sort of stand with your toe pointing this way so you could step in with the right foot. Most players stepped in with the right foot for right-handed players when they served. As a matter of fact, my dad taught me how to serve that way, and for many years as a junior, I don't want you guys to think I'm too old here, but I used to toss and then step in with my right foot, and my left foot had to be sort of angled like this to allow myself to step in. But nowadays, pretty much everybody stands really closed, and I would encourage you to close off your stance. Make sure you're very sideways here. And I don't want to get too deep into the details of the stance, but we could talk about that. This is sort of the start position, and Mark Kovacs's 8-stage model of the serve, this would be sort of the start, and the tossing action is the release. It's stage 1 and 2 of the Kovacs 8-stage model of the serve, which is a great model. If you're interested in biomechanics and if you're interested in understanding the serve, I highly recommend you learn about the 8-stage model of the serve. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video about maximizing your serve power without the legs. I think sometimes we forget that people may have some issues, medical conditions, previous surgeries, reasons why they just can't jump or it's just too stressful on their body. And that's fine. You can still have a great serve. You can still hit with good power. You can have a beautiful, smooth, biomechanically correct motion. So I encourage you to consider that. And if you're going to hit the serve without jumping, do it the way I said. Do it with the scissor movement. Make it nice and smooth. Work on your power. Work on your mobility, flexibility. Hit a lot of serves per day. And don't worry about all those pros who are jumping. You don't need that. You're going to have a great serve without the legs. Guys, if you like this video, check out another video that I made about the serve right here.